Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Powerful Proposal Presentations, How to Influence Executives and Win the Project. My name is Marcelle Saab, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I'm the Program Manager here at MBO Partners, and I'm in charge of communications to our current consultant base. In addition to that, I'm responsible for putting together programs and partnerships that add value to our consultants' experience with us and help them run their businesses more efficiently. So you might be wondering what MBO Partners does. Well, simply put, we make it easy for independent consultants and their clients to work together. More specifically, we provide an infrastructure for independent consultants and small businesses to plug into to use what they need so they can focus on doing what they love. We take care of all of their admin and their back office functions such as contract management, billings, expense management, taxes, benefits, and insurances. Basically, the logistics that can bog an independent consultant down. So we take the hassle away so they can concentrate on picking up new clients and increasing their billable time. Now let's take care of a few administrative items real quick before we begin. If you look on the screen, you'll see the webinar controls. As you see, the full screen icon maximizes the presentation area. The little orange button will minimize it and bring it over to the right-hand side of the screen. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat box that you see. We will be addressing those questions as we proceed. We will also be recording this webinar and emailing it out to you along with this slide deck next week. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Dave Underhill. As president of Underhill Training and Development, Dave works globally with clients such as Microsoft, Intel, US Bank, United Way, just to name a few, to help them grow their businesses through clear, concise, and compelling presentations. Dave loves helping people take their skills and their careers to the next level, and we are so thrilled to have him today. And right before I pass this along to him, I just want to let all of the active tweeters out there know that we have a live chat going on Twitter right now with hashtag MBOWeb. So join in the discussion if you're interested. And so with that, I'd like to pass this over to you, Dave.
Great, thanks, Marcelle. And thank you, everybody, for attending. It's a great opportunity. About a year ago, I saw a very compelling survey that was done for executives. And they asked them, this is about 50 or 60 different executives, how effective were salespeople in engaging them when they came on a sales call. So they asked them, how often do salespeople demonstrate specific behaviors? Right. The first one they looked at was, they asked them, how often do salespeople really demonstrate the ability to understand the metrics that drive your business, those measures. So that would be the first one. So if we could advance the slide. And in that case, it was only 35% of the time that salespeople really demonstrated that they understood what were the important measures or metrics that the business was operating under. And the second group of things they asked about were how much they understood, the salespeople understood the external forces, right, competitive forces. What were the things in the environment, the economy, their competitors that were affecting their business? And how often the salespeople could really demonstrate and walk through what was the return on investment that the executive would get from purchasing their products or services. In that case, it was only 27% of the time. And then the third group that they looked at really was around how effective was the salesperson in communicating the value that their products and services offered, and how often did the executives get the sense that, you know, this salesperson is really interested in my business first versus selling their products or services. And in both of those, it was only 19% of the time. So if you look at this survey, it really shows a pretty big gap between what executives expect and how the salespeople were showing up and communicating with them. So it's a big gap, but it's also, I think, for us on the call, it's a great opportunity, because if we can address some of these gaps and we can show up and communicate more effectively around these business measures that executives expect, we can be more successful. So today, what are we going to do to address this gap? So how do you close it? First off, we're going to take a look at how do you target your presentation? How do you get into the mindset of executives? Secondly is how do you create a compelling storyline that really engages the audience, which is the third thing. And then finally, we'll wrap up just with some basics around how do you focus and prepare yourself to have that successful engagement at the executive level. And as we go through this, what we'll do is I'll stop after this first bullet point about targeting your presentation, and we'll take a couple questions. I want this to be interactive. And then there'll also be time at the end when we'll have for questions. And then we're also going to follow up, I know we'll talk about this, is we're going to be on LinkedIn and Twitter. And so if there are questions that we aren't able to get to in the session, we'll definitely follow up with you and respond to those. All right, let's take a look at the first section. How do you target your presentation to executives? All right, next slide. So you got to know their world. And let's go ahead and just click through these. You got to know their background, their goals, challenges, and priorities, motivations, incentives, the roles and decision-making process. I mean, this is all the basic stuff we know if you've been in presentation training or sales training. As you have to understand, put yourself in the shoes of your audience. And the main one I underlined there was really around goals, challenges, and priorities. And the key with that is you're coming in with your project or the service or product that you offer. The executive obviously has a number of different departments, a number of different groups they're dealing with. So it's really key to understand what their goals are for their organization. But also I think more importantly is what their priorities are. And what I found for myself early on is because I'm in the training business, I was very comfortable in talking to the training manager, the HR director, folks that really spoke my language. And eventually as I had some successes, and I would find myself more in the business groups or the business lines, I'd be talking to a VP. And it was funny is that as soon as that title of VP came up, I just got much more nervous. And because I was a little bit out of my comfort zone. I didn't understand the world of the VP as well as I did of the training manager or the HR person. And so it really took me some time to start to get into the mindset of what's different, what are they looking at that is different than the folks I'm used to talking to. And I think there's a challenge that a lot of us run into. And so over the years, what I've been able to find out is, all right, they are really, and we'll talk about this in a second, they are really driven by the results of the organization, the vision, more of those bigger picture things. And oftentimes the products and services that we're providing, they can be strategic, but oftentimes they're more on that tactical of helping them to get to where they want to go. But it really is a different language and a little bit of a different mindset to be aware of and to get comfortable with, so that when you do go in, you can show them and demonstrate to them that you kind of understand what it's like to be in their shoes. So first thing is to know their world, and then the next slide is really going to be about how do you find out that information. And today, the great thing about social media and the internet today is there's no lack of places that you can go to find information, and not just about public companies, which is easier, even about private or local companies. You've got the general media, which is the business press, and even the general press locally. You've got social media, corporate, et cetera. And so you can look here and say, it doesn't have to be the Wall Street Journal. It could be your local business journal, your local daily journal of commerce. In Oregon, where I'm at, is the Oregon Business Magazine. Lots of different places where you can start to gather information, both about the executive, him or herself, but also about their business and, what's going on in their industry. LinkedIn, I noticed a number of people that signed up had checked out my LinkedIn page. That's a great opportunity to gather more information on, say, more of a personal basis, say around the background of the executive, what their career path has been. Is it a technical career path? Is it more of a business career path? What other organizations have they been involved in? If they've had increasingly higher levels of responsibility, you can get an idea of that. And sometimes people will describe what they believe their strengths are, their passions are, their vision. So you can get a sense of that background information from them. For public companies, that bottom left quadrant is a Form 10K, which is around the annual reports for the company. Proxy statements are another thing for public companies. You can actually go in there, and this is very interesting. you can go in there and find out how different executives in those public companies are compensated. You know, how much is salary, how much is stock, and then it will actually give you a report because each public company has a compensation committee that reviews the compensation for each executive, and they'll give a short description of, you know, what that person, what the executive was being evaluated on, what accomplishments they had. So you get a sense, at least in those public companies, of how they're being measured, what their motivations are, at least from a financial standpoint. And then on the bottom right is using your own network of contacts, connections, etc. And so there's a number of different ways that you can find out information about a specific executive, their company, or even an executive group if you're working with a number of people in the organization. And sometimes what you'll find is the decision-making process in the organization is going to be involved both maybe a CEO and some of the other senior executives in addition to folks that you might be dealing with. And a great example just on the social media part of things is I've been trading emails back and forth and some phone calls with an executive trying to get his input on a training that we were putting together. And I just happened to be, you know, I went onto YouTube, I typed in his name, and found a couple of different presentations that he had done at an industry conference. And so I was just kind of listening to them, seeing what his points were, jotting down some notes. And as I was doing this, I get a call, and it's this executive. And I go, I said, well, this is great, thanks for the call. You know, what a coincidence. I'm sitting here watching the presentation that you gave in London last year, and you were talking about, you know, company strategy. You know, tell me more about that. And so I had this immediate credibility with him. And this is all, you know, circumstance and happenstance that came together, but I was doing my homework ahead of time. And I think the key here is the more you know, the more credibility you can have as you're walking in the door. All right, so that's knowing where to find information. What this leads to, next slide, is connecting your project to the company goals. And as you look at it, you're walking in saying, hey, here are my capabilities, here's my services. The executives up at this more strategic level thinking about company goals. So let's look at a couple examples here. Let's just build out this slide. So I was working with a banking customer. They're looking to drive revenue growth from their existing customer base. Right? So they've got customers, but they're only buying 2 products, 2.5 products on average. So that's the company goal, is to drive revenue growth. The group, the sales group, wants to develop deeper customer insight. They want to understand their customers better so they can cross-sell their products. So if the customer only has 2 products, they can make more money off of existing customers who like their services already by selling them additional products. So you come in and start talking to the sales manager or hopefully the executive level folks, and your project really is going to be around some sales training. So if we can build that out, kind of see how they connect those together. So from the top, their perspective is going to be around revenue growth, getting deeper insight, helping our salespeople to be more effective in cross-selling. And then if we can build the next part there, right, you got sales training coming in. Because we're on the internet here, we'll have a little bit of delay and sometimes how things load. But the key here, right, is you want to connect. You want to be able to connect what you're doing up to those top-level goals that the executives has. And oftentimes, if you think about it, if they're trying to drive revenue growth from the customer base, there's a number of different strategies that they'll have in place to do that. Customer insights, one of them. You know, developing new product might be another one. And sales training might be only one of the things that we're looking at. But as far as building credibility with that executive group, if you can show your understanding of how your training will help drive that higher level company goal, you're in good shape. All right, next slide if we can. Okay, at least on my screen, I'm getting a little bit of a delay here. There we go. Oh, we'll go back one slide. We'll get the communication styles in just a second. So the other example I had there that's great. Another company I was working with, they wanted to grow in emerging markets, Brazil, India, Malaysia, Vietnam. So one of their strategies of the group, the marketing group, was to localize our products, right? Make sure that they fit not just a generic product, but something that was local to that specific geographic area. So the products and also the marketing and marketing materials need to be localized. And so the company, the group I was working with, a very small consulting group, and they did translation. So they went in and said, we're going to help you translate your product, your support materials, your marketing materials, so they are local to that geographic region. And they were able to tie and really align it back into the bigger goal of growing in emerging markets. So whatever your service is, I know we got some design firms, we got some presentation firms, we got some talent management companies, lots of different people on the line. The key here is really to make sure that you understand what those company goals are and that you align your proposal, your services, products to those bigger goals. All right, so that's more on the business side. Let's take a look more specifically. You saw the little sneak peek there of communication styles. One of the things that I also found early on was I'm an amiable steady. I'm really in the business that I do. My passion is really around developing people. And so my style is very personal. I like to go in, I like to chat, I like to really get to know people. And I found again that when I was talking to training managers and HR people, God, their style really worked well for me. And as soon as I was moving out of that comfort zone, I found, especially on the conscientious and analytical and the dominant driver, there's different styles. There's different ways that they like to receive information, but there's also different ways that they make decisions. And so what I want to do here is just do an overview, because I know a lot of people have been through assessments like this before, and just talk about how to build in flexibility and how to address the communication style differences that you will find when you're talking to executives. So let's shift to the next slide. So your dominant driver. These are going to be your prototypical CEO, entrepreneur, senior executives. They're very direct and assertive. Their primary focus and the questions that you'll get and the information that you want is all going to be around results. How do you help me get to results and get there quicker? What's the return on investment? They like to be in control of the decision-making process. So the key here is provide options and let them decide. Right? Rather than trying to drive the decision yourself, they will resist that because they're used to being and they like to be in control. And a real short example here is I was dealing with a biotech company, and I got referred to the VP of their R&D group. And I did a little bit of research and talked to my contacts. And this guy was both a physician, he had a doctorate in public health, he had an MBA, and there was one other degree in there. And so it was like, oh, and he was a lawyer. He had a law degree. And so this guy was very much of a driven person. You could just tell by the degrees he had. And so we had scheduled a half-an-hour appointment. I would typically go in and try to do my chit-chat, right, my sociable, amiable type person. But I knew with this profile and some feedback I gotten from someone who referred me to him that you just get to the point. And so we sat down. We had a half-an-hour meeting. We sat down, said, hey, great. And you just started out and said, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your company. So, okay, great. So I had to be very quick, very focused on my value proposition, what I did, et cetera. And then after 5 minutes of that, he says, okay, I got it. And then he just got up from the table, walked over to the whiteboard, and just started diagramming out his organizational structure, what they've been doing. And then based on that, I said, well, where do you want to go in the next 3 to 5 years? What results are you looking for? And he said, well, there's 4 of them. He's holding out 1, 2, 3, 4. So he's very focused, very driven, and what was going to be a half-an-hour meeting was done in 20 minutes, right? And we've had some follow-up through his direct reports later on. So I was able to address the communication style difference, but also be flexible myself. All right, next slide. Your sociable and influencer folks. Big picture, outgoing, extroverted, driven by the vision of where they want to go. They focus on people involvement, testimonials of other people that have used your services or products. And so you got to be enthusiastic, provide ideas for implementation, but don't get down too much into the details, and show how you are passionate about helping them achieve their vision. Next slide. Is going to be around your amiable, steady, right? So this is myself, right? Calm, listen well, may avoid conflict. I'm a people development person. So these folks will focus on support, customer service, and then say if you had a service or a training or a product that you want to sell throughout their organization, they're really going to be interested a lot in, well, how are you going to help us if you're asking people to change their behavior or do something different? How are you going to support us? So that'll be a key focus. And while you might not find the amiable and steady folks on a regular basis in the executive suite, you might have a VP of HR. The key here is they're going to be involved in the decision-making process somehow and somewhere. So as you're working with them, you'll find that if you can provide some step-by-step implementation plans and focus on the impact of people in the organization, managing change, things like that, that will appeal to this style. And again, if you think about it, with avoiding direct conflict, being wary of change and risk, these folks like to really be involved. So you're going to be spending more time with them, just listening, understanding their concerns, and addressing those. So conversely, if you happen to be a driver personality yourself, hard charging, coming in, wanting to close the deal, you'll get a lot of both active but maybe passive pushback from these folks because they don't like conflict, they don't like being pushed to make a decision, they want to be engaged and involved. So part of what we talked about here is understanding your own style, but also to have some flexibility around that. And again, that first bullet is, what are some of the clues and some of the cues that you can pay attention to? And that's what people often ask me is, how do I know? Well, you got your dominant driver, they're going to be talking fast, moving fast, asking you a question about results. Those socializer influencers are going to be very extroverted, very energetic, talking about vision and people. Amiable, steady, you can pick up those behaviors. So the last one is going to be around your conscientious analytical. Very well organized, less emotional, very objective, focusing on logic, accuracy. So what you need to do is to clarify, help them clarify priorities, understand what their priorities are, and what are the specific criteria. Because they'll have a very, I guess, explicit or well-defined list of criteria that they're using, and from their perspective of the decision of how they're going to decide, say, which vendor to go from if you're in a competitive situation. And so if you can emphasize your track record, results, and as you're doing your presentation, make sure you're presenting a very well thought out, kind of a logical flow. If you think back on those earlier slides of what's the overall company goal, what's the group goal, and then what your project is, they'll be looking for that thread or that track all the way through from what you're recommending back up to the group and then the corporate goals. I want to see the logic of that, and it's easy to understand. All right, next slide. So the key here is know your communication style. Again, like I mentioned, dealing with the dominant driver person. I know I'm an amiable, steady person. That's just the way I approach things. And what I've learned over time is that for me to be successful, it's almost like, in a sense, we're talking a little bit of a different dialect, even though we might all be talking English. And so I've got to be able to make some adjustments in order to both understand how they make decisions, but also to give them information in the way that they want to get it. So I talked about taking a short break here for any questions that we might have. So Marcel, if we have any questions from the group, or if you have some things that you think might need clarification, why don't we spend a moment or two doing that?
Sure, yeah, we've actually gotten a few really good questions in. So you just talked about knowing your communication style, knowing their communication style, but I think one thing that's been on some of our minds is how do you manage an executive when you walk in that you can tell right off the bat maybe isn't a huge fan of you.
Okay. Wow. So that that gets back a little bit to, and there's a number of different reasons that might be. I guess there's a lot of context that goes behind that type of situation. So if you look back on what we talked about is understanding their world, if they are not a fan of yours and you know that ahead of time, a couple of things that you can do is obviously trying to identify what led up to that particular state of mind, I guess. Depending on the executive, you might, if you're coming back in for maybe a renewal of a proposal, or you've done work there before, I think it's always good just to not to dwell on that, but just to acknowledge that, I know we've had some challenges in the past, not to dwell on those problems or the things that have happened. But I think part of building credibility is taking ownership of your role in maybe a customer experience that wasn't exactly what that executive expected, but then quickly bridge to the future. I think, I've worked with people in the media training side of things, and you definitely want to address those issues, but don't dwell on those. So I think that would be, if you walk in and you know that because things haven't gone well, again, depending on the situation, you want to address those and be upfront and take ownership of them, and then be able to bridge to the future and what you've learned from that, your part in it, what you see happening differently in the future. I think that can be very effective. Sometimes, if this is the first time you had a chance to meet with an executive after something has happened, and this is what I've learned, sometimes what you do is you don't present anything. You just go in and you listen. You say, I understand we've had some problems. Before we do anything more, I want to learn more about what happened, what you're thinking, because I want to make sure that we make this right. And so sometimes what I've learned is I go in with my agenda, and if I get that sense that there's something wrong, then I'll just say, you know what, I'm going to put my agenda aside. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to listen, and if I listen, I can build some credibility and some understanding, and then we can move forward. I can come back later. So it's almost kind of on an intuitive basis is, pay attention to, understanding what their needs and concerns are, and then if you can address them quickly, great. If not, we'll just sit down and listen.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay, we have another question here. What can I do if I'm stumped by a client question and can't think of the answer?
I think one of the things initially, especially if we're in kind of those maybe high-stake, high-stress situations, is, and we'll talk about this a little bit towards the end, is just make sure you're breathing.
Right.
Which sounds funny, right? It sounds very funny, but I tell you, when I go in and I'm nervous and I know I get tense, my body gets tense and my mind gets tight, right? I can't think quickly. And so I think the key there is you might just say, that's a great question. Give me a second, because I really want to spend some time to make sure I understand where you're coming from, because that's a very important area that we're trying to explore. So you can buy yourself a little bit of time, right, not to avoid it, but take a breath as the person's asking the question.
Makes a lot of sense. Listen, we've seen. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, and then the other thing is once you've done that, as you're listening, what I do for myself is I identify what the issue is that person's trying to ask me about. Maybe it's cost, maybe it's timing or implementation. And then the first thing that gets into my mind is, all right, what's my point of view about that issue? So if you find yourself stumped a little bit and you need to think on your feet, first thing to do is take a breath, understand the issue, and then in your mind say, all right, what's my point of view about that issue? And that at least gets your response started. And then once you've got your point of view out there, you can give them a couple examples that support it.
That's great. So we're actually getting quite a few questions in, and just for the sake of time, I think we should move on, and what we'll do is we will address them as soon as we can, and if we don't get to it during this presentation, we will definitely publish all the questions and answers out to all of you once we're done.
Absolutely. Would love to do that. Yeah, so let's move on to the next section. So this is more about understanding the executive mindset. So we talked also about how do you create a compelling storyline. So this is, you've got to understand what the needs are. So the first thing is, you've got to know what executives expect. And as I've done different presentation skills trainings inside of organizations, I've had a great opportunity then to go in and ask executives, what do you expect when people come and present to you? What are they doing well? What are they not doing well? And so I do a lot of training on inside of companies about how to present to the executives in their own company, which is a big challenge. And so there's some very common themes that have come out. First one is, and this was #1 on everybody's list when I talked to them. This is like 25 to 35 different executives. They said, when you come in, tell me, why are we here and what do you want from me? Set the context and the purpose. Because if you think about it, you've been planning your presentation, you're on the agenda. That executive, between the time the appointment has been set and you're showing up, they have had 50, 20, 30, whatever, however many different meetings and appointments. They are not necessarily going to remember all the details of why you're showing up. And that's just the nature of the executive kind of business style. So first thing off the bat is remind them quickly of why we're here, okay, what the purpose of the meeting and the presentation is, and in a sense, do you want a decision, do you want feedback, do you want a referral to somebody else in the organization? Set the context and the purpose, #1. Secondly, provide information to help them make their decisions. So think of yourself as that, you probably heard the term trusted advisor. I had one executive say to me, you know what, I know people are nervous when they come and present to me. What sometimes they forget is, especially if it's a big decision, I'm nervous about making that decision because it's a very visible one. I've got political risk. I've got business risk if I make the wrong decision. So they are looking to us, whether we're internal or external, to be their advisor, to give them information so they go, okay, this is great, thank you. That really helps me to feel like I can make an informed decision. So that's what the second thing. Third thing is, again, tie your projects to our goals. I might say people come in and they go, hey, here's my project, and the executive's going, well, okay, how does that help me to get to where I want to go? So she might say, I understand what you do. Can you show me how this is going to help me achieve my priorities? Next one is make sure that you're clear with your ask or what you want from them. So again, sometimes people come in, and if they don't set the context and the purpose at the beginning, the executive's going, okay, this is interesting. Now, what do they want from me? And so if they're not clear on that, they don't know how to interact or ask you questions. So be clear with what you want. And then finally is to deliver with confidence and conviction, right? So if you got something, make sure you've got the eye contact, you're using pauses effectively, you know, show that you've got some passion behind your idea. So again, this is key. These are very specific things, and they're very consistent across different companies and different executives. So now if you have that sense of what they expect, how do you create your story structure? And I think we all know from whether it's Toastmasters or other trainings that you have an opening, a body, and a closing. But if we can just go ahead and build out the slide, if you think about a proposal presentation, let's just go ahead and build all those out. You know, it can look like this. So your opening is, why are we here? Right? It could be a very quick refresh for the executive of, we met last week, and you asked us to go out and do some research and come back to you with recommendations. Right? So why are we here? And this is more the final proposal presentation. You're going to have a lot of other informal presentations with the executive and other people, but let's focus on that final presentation when you're coming back with a recommendation. So where are we starting? So what were the measures or the metrics, or what was the situation that the company was in when you started talking to them? And I'll show you an example in a second. What are you proposing? What are the expected results? And then why should they approve your proposal? So this is a nice way to think just in terms of what are the questions in their mind? Why are we here? Now where do we start? Why are we even considering doing this? What are you proposing? Okay, what can expected results can I get, etc. So next slide. If you look at that same flow, why are we here, etc., let's go ahead and build out the left-hand side there. So if you had this structure of opening, body, and closing. I'll walk you through this in a second. If you think back on that example I talked about, the banking customer that wanted to get more income from each of its existing customers it had. So why are we here? You might come back and your opening might be, thank you very much, Sue. A couple of weeks ago, you asked us to go out and do some research and come back with some options about how to really drive more revenue from your existing customer base. Today, what I want to talk about is some options that we've come together, and we're really looking for you to make a decision about which direction you want to go. Boom, you're done in 30 seconds, setting the context and the purpose. Why are we here? To get, bottom line, get more money from your customers. So where are we starting? You've got some information. You've gone out and done some research, and you've talked to people on the sales side and the marketing side and the finance side inside the bank. And you found out that on average, for a particular customer, they might only have 2 of the bank's products. And if they only had 2 of the bank's products, it meant that the bank earned a certain amount of revenue from interest or fees or whatever on an annual basis. So that's where the bank was starting, right? Certain baseline of numbers or measures. Okay, that's great, that's good. What are we proposing? We're proposing sales training as one solution to address your higher level goal of getting money from customers and selling more products per customer. Right? Walk through that, give them a little bit of detail on that. What are the expected results? Now, this is really key. Is part of your, I guess we call it discovery or research process with a customer. As you talk to them, you want to collaborate with them to come up with that return on investment that we mentioned earlier. So you might find that by going out and talking to the salespeople, talking to marketing, talking to some of the finance, that with this sales training, this is kind of based also on your experience with the clients, you might say, our goal is going to be that over a 12-month period of time, that we're going to add 1.5 products on average for each customer that you have. We think that our training will help people get deeper insights and be able to cross-sell new products more effectively. That's great. So this should be a combination of your experience with other customers in similar situations. But I think even, more importantly, some of this information should also come from the customer. So if you can say to the CEO, he goes, well, where did that number come from? You go, well, we sat down with Sue, we sat down with Joe in finance, we sat down with Helen, that's in marketing, and we came up with these numbers very conservatively, that we believe that we can add a product and a half per customer. And that can turn into $500,000 a year in additional revenue from existing customers. And if that information comes from discussions that you've had with people inside the organization, that's going to have a lot more credibility and relevance to that executive rather than you bringing in a case study necessarily, just a case study or some industry figures. So as much as you can, combine your experience and insight of similar situations and results with what's very specific to that customer. So there's your what are the expected results, and why approve, kind of a summary. What we're going to do is give your salespeople some skills, drive some insight into existing customers, help them cross-sell, and drive revenue. Again, you're going back up that chain of your project, the group goal, to the organizational goal. So the key here is to have a very tight structure that builds the business case for your proposal. I think in a lot of cases we know individually that, wow, if this company has a greater brand awareness and a cleaner look and feel to all their materials, that's going to be great. Or if they can get some new people hired into key positions on a permanent or interim basis, that's going to be great. Or if we can do a new logo design that is really compelling and helps them stand out, we know from our perspective why that's good, but we've got to tie that to the business goals for the organization. All right, let's shift to the next stage, which is how do you engage the audience? And let's just kind of switch to the next slide. So again, and I don't want to emphasize this too much, but I think it's critical because I think as we all know, you've got to be really on target with your opening. Because if you don't, you lose them. I had in the training recently, I had a guy mention, we were talking about this. He said, "Oh yeah, I have an ongoing client, and typical executive, short attention span." And he said that in this last presentation he was doing for his executive group, he said that the guy, after about 30 seconds, he shifted his chair back. He took his smartphone, and kind of under the table, he was playing the game Angry Birds. And the only reason that people knew he was doing that rather than checking email or whatever, and again, I don't play Angry Birds, I'll admit that, but I guess there's a sound that happens when you accomplish a goal. And he says people heard this sound going on. So he lost the executive at the beginning. And so once you lose them, they're gone. It's hard to get their attention back. So that's why your opening is really critical. So why are we here? Let's just click through these. Review the situation. So if it's a regular meeting and you don't need to go into details, say, Sue, it's great. We're glad to be back from the work that we've done last week. What we're here to do is this. Reconfirm the agenda. Okay, our plan today is, does that still work for you? Because things can change between the time you set the meeting and also the time that you actually show up. And then outline your decision. What is your ask? So that's number one. Be concise with your opening. Number two, next slide, is establish value for them. So if you click to this next part here, is oftentimes we'll talk about the what, but we also need to talk about the so what. So the what is, again, I work with some technology companies. They'll talk about if you move your on-site servers to the cloud, which is the big thing nowadays, it will save you money on your fixed expenses. And people go, oh, that's a good thing. But that's, it's kind of a very generic. So what you want to do is to say, that's the what. The so what for your company is, it will free up money for your strategic projects that you talked to us about. You want to have a new customer relationship management software program. So if we save money on your fixed expenses, you can spend it on that project, which, because I've talked to your sales and marketing and finance people, we project will bring in an additional $200,000 of revenue over the next 2 years. So we're all very comfortable talking about our what's, like what we do in a very generic sense. So as you explore the organization, their goals, etc., be able to relate that back specifically to what that so what that will help that customer do. All right, next one is help executives manage risk. And let's just click through this slide. Yeah, just build it down. Again, I mentioned one executive a few slides ago a few slides ago who said, I'm taking some risk when I'm making these decisions. So part of what we can do is to help that executive manage risk by understanding, so if they're bringing you on and they're investing money in you, what are their risks from a business, competitive, political standpoint inside their company, a technical risk? Provide them with those compelling alternatives. Here's some ways that we can help you address those risks but also achieve your goals. If you happen to have a pretty big ticket and long-term project, I think one of the things from a risk standpoint is, especially if you're newer to that organization, is to be able to break it down into phases perhaps and say, here's phase one, here's what the investment's going to be, the cost to you. Here's our goals or our objectives that we will achieve by the end of phase one. And what we'll do, Sue, is we'll come back to you at the end of phase one, make sure that we're on track for your expectations and the goals that you have set. So especially in bigger ticket or longer term projects, break it down from, say, a $800,000 project, be able to break it down into smaller chunks so they can see that as the project progresses, that it's on track and they're getting that return on their investment. And then be open about uncertainties. If there are some things, and again, this comes back to your question of, someone might ask you a question that you're not prepared to answer or you don't have the answer to. You just say, you know what, part of what we're going to be doing between now and in this phase one is gathering that information. So if there are some uncertainties, just be open about them because they know their business better than you do. And so if you say that's really an area that we need to explore some more before we move ahead, you go, that's great. Let's spend some time with that. Who do I need to talk to? So that's how you keep them engaged. Concise opening, show value, and show that you're helping them both manage risk while they achieve their goals. All right, last section. Preparing for success. Let's just keep the photo up there for a second. And that's okay. This is a photo of me, actually. Is in front of a data center, right, a computing center for one of my customers, which is Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle. And I've been doing work with them for almost 20 years. Initially, we just did some real basic training for some scientists and researchers, some of their middle managers, et cetera, and it went well. And because it's a research organization, they have lots of researchers and lots of scientists who do presentations both inside their organization, at conferences, et cetera. And so once we got some good feedback, they said, all right, we want to expand this. We want to have more scientists do this. But before we do that, the president of Fred Hutch wants to meet with you and to talk a little bit more, find out what you do, and see if it really is going to be a good fit to have some of the more senior, experienced scientists go through that. So I said, great. So number one, this was a long time ago. I was super nervous. Number two, the president at the time happened to be a guy named Lee Hartwell, who was a Nobel Prize winner. So I'm going, oh, think about being nervous. I was super nervous. But my friend, who was a training and HR manager, just kind of sat me down and walked through it and said, Lee is very analytical. So what you need to do is to go in, don't have a lot of information, just make sure you've got a good plan, you can explain yourself and explain the value that you offer. So that's great. I kind of planned that, I had it all outlined. And she said, you know what? He's looking for some advice because he knows his scientists need to be more effective as they present. So he's looking for you to be someone who can provide him with that objective information. So it's great. So put my presentation together, had it all there in my materials. So walk into his office, a very short kind of introductory conversation. Then he hands me a videotape. And this is, you can tell when it was, in the 90s, right? It was a videotape. And he says, well, I'd like you to take a look at this. And there's a TV, VCR and a TV monitor there. I'm going, oh my God. And so he says, this is one of my recent presentations. I'd like to get your feedback on this. I'm going, oh great, the Nobel Prize guy is asking me for feedback. And so we did. We sat down for about 10 minutes. I gave him some feedback. And he said, well, I've been doing it this way for a number of years. Why do you think that would be a better way to do it? I go, well, because of this and because of that. He goes, oh, okay, that's interesting. And he said, well, why do you think this would be of value to our scientists? And so we just, it wasn't a presentation at all, right? We had a discussion. Once we were done discussing his videotape, he says, oh, okay, well, thanks for coming in. I think you have something of value to offer. I'm going, oh, right, that's really low praise. I didn't really get much out of that meeting. And so I walked out and I went back to my friend. I said, I don't think it went very well. And she said, well, what happened? She goes, well, yeah, he just said, he showed me a video, and he said, well, he thinks I have something to offer. And I go, well, that's really not very, high praise. And she goes, oh, you're kidding me. He doesn't say that to anybody unless he sees they have something of value. So that's great. So the story here is, I went in with a plan. Well, I did some research ahead of time, but I had to be flexible. So fortunately, I found out that the president at the time, being a scientist and researcher, was very conscientious, right? He was very analytical. So rather than going in and doing my chit-chat and then going into who all had done it, he wanted logic. And so I was flexible with my plan and my approach. So the second bullet here on this slide is I did rehearse my content and plan for questions that might come up. So I was ready for the question around how I thought it would add value for the scientist. I didn't really use any of the content I had prepared, but that's okay because that was not what he wanted. What he wanted was to see that I knew what I was talking about, and the way he was going to test that was to show me a video of himself. And then finally, and I've talked about this a number of times, is I really did go in there with an advisor mindset. My friend Kim was great. She said, yeah, Lee's a Nobel Prize winner, but he doesn't have the expertise in presentation skills. And he knows that's an area where his scientists need some help. So don't be intimidated by his degrees, et cetera, his awards, because he's looking to you specifically as that very focused, trusted advisor to help him accomplish a goal that he has, which is to help the Hutchison be more visible and to get the scientists out there to do presentations to show people the great work that they're doing. So as long as I had that mindset going in, I think we can all adopt that mindset when we're going in and talking to executives, that we're an advisor to them to help them be successful. That takes some of the pressure off. So that's how you can prepare for success. Have a plan, but be flexible. Rehearse so you know your stuff and you can adapt to whatever situation comes up. And from a mindset standpoint, from an attitude, think of yourself as that advisor, someone who has something of value to offer to the executive. All right, next slide. So we're going to wrap up here. Let's just build this one out. How do you target your presentations? How do you close this gap? It's just what we talked about. Understand the mindset. What are their goals and priorities and objectives? Create that compelling storyline of where we started, why are we here, where we started, why should you approve? Engage in the audience, and then take some time. I think the key for me, whether it's a phone call or an in-person meeting, is take that time to prepare and rehearse beforehand, but also be flexible to adjust to really what's going on when you show up for the meeting. So with that, I want to share some of these ideas that I've picked up over my years of consulting. A lot of it's trial by error to start out with, but my goal here today was to give some ideas about how to demystify that whole thing of presenting to executives and realizing they're folks like you and me. They have a different way of looking at their business, and they're looking to folks like all of us to help them achieve their success. So given that, let's go ahead and take some time for a couple more questions. If you like that presenter's note sheet that I showed with that example early on, if you'd like a copy of that, you can email me. If you want to know more about Underhill Training, there's our website. And again, I really appreciate your time today. And we will definitely follow up with responses to any questions on LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera, because we want to make sure that we help you be successful also.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was wonderful. Actually, we have just a few more minutes for a couple questions, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. That's why I was looking at my clock here and said, all right, for about 5 minutes. Yep.
Great, great. Okay, so what do you think of having exploratory meetings with people you can get referrals to inside an organization? Okay, so go over that again one more time. Sure. What do you think of having exploratory meetings with people you can get referrals to inside an organization? Okay, so but if I understand that correctly, I'll make an assumption here is that these are people that, they may be executives, they may not be executives, but say you've got a referral in there and you're just exploring the possible opportunities to do business with that company. And so I'd say yes, absolutely. That's a great way to gather information specific to that organization and to those folks so we can find out all that information we mentioned earlier about their goals and priorities, what are some of their measures and metrics, those type of things. I think those are great. You can also find out about the decision-making process and the different stakeholders that are involved. So I think the key is it's almost like the job interview process. And since you just be real clear is if you're going in to explore, just keep make it more of a discovery process, and don't even bring your materials. Just say, if someone asks and say, well, I'll follow up with you on that. So if you really are going in an exploratory or discovery phase, make that how you operate in those meetings. So don't pitch at all. Don't even bring materials. So it's really more listening. It's definitely more listening. A lot of listening. Yep. Okay, actually another great question. Any advice on getting meetings when you don't have a contact inside the company?
I think, let's see, don't have contact inside the company. I think part of it is doing your research without those contacts, trying to find out at least a couple of pieces of information either about that executive and or about the company that you can tie your products and services to. And so it might, and I'll just make up an example kind of on the fly here, is that if you're trying to if you get someone on the phone, you finally get through the executive or someone, is rather than saying, hey, I'd like to come in and talk to you and explore, and they're going, I don't have time to explore. But if you've done some research and you say, and you get them on the phone, you say, I understand that you're really, from reading in the Business Journal, that you're expanding into blah, blah, blah markets. I'd like to talk to you about how we have helped, we've helped similar companies do that. Or if going into new markets, I'd like to talk to you about how we've been able to help other companies expand their sales force by very quickly and efficiently hiring experienced people. Right? So be able to identify a key driver or goal for that organization that is related to the executive, and then have a short but quick kind of value proposition statement that you can give them over the phone that shows that, one, you understand their company, and two, that you have some experience that would be of value to them. So they're going, this is interesting. I want to find out more. This person's different than all the other salespeople that call on me and just want an appointment. They've taken a little bit of time to research it. They understand what our challenges and goals are, and they've showed me a little bit of something of value that they might be able to offer. So that's how you close the gap, and that's how you differentiate yourself from somebody else.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dave. I think that we probably need to come to a close end
Sure.
here. I want to thank you so much for a wonderful presentation today. I think we all learned quite a bit more about how to deliver these excellent presentations. I want to just go over some things that you see on your screen right now. If you have any questions about MBO Partners, please feel free to email us at info@mbopartners.com. You can visit our website to learn more, mbopartners.com. You can follow us on Twitter, or you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. We also have a LinkedIn group, MBO Partners, that you can join. And as a reminder, we did have a lot more questions, and so we are going to send those to Dave. He's going to respond to them, and we are going to publish them to all of you, along with all of the slides that you saw today and a recording. So again, I want to thank you so much, Dave, and I want to thank all of you for attending our webinar today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.